Introduction to Philosophy, Lecture 15, Anselm's Ontological Argument, and Gaunilo's Lost Island. Anselm's ontological argument is presented in the form of a prayer, and the language of the prayer is so unusual to our modern eyes that we may not even recognize what his argument actually means. To start, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy explains that ontological arguments are arguments for the conclusion that God exists, from premises which are supposed to derive from some source other than observation of the world, for example, from reason alone. This feature can be seen in Anselm's many references to thought in his premises. His premise that God is something greater than which cannot be thought is a complicated way of making two claims at once. One, nothing is greater than God, and two, if you can think of something greater than God, then your idea of God is incorrect. If God can be thought to exist, it would surely be greater to exist in reality as well. So we can see that any conception of God existing in thought but not in reality is an inferior concept, and thus not God. Therefore, Anselm claims, something than which a greater cannot be thought undoubtedly exists both in thought and in reality. This type of argument has been reformulated by others, most notably by Alvin Plantinga, who was well known for his contributions to epistemology and philosophy of religion. Plantinga deployed a version of this argument that depended on modal logic that is definitely worth further study. A common objection to this argument is what our text refers to as Gaunilo's Lost Island objection. This argument involves imagining that there is an island that is greater than any other. If we can imagine it, then it is in our thoughts, but again, it would be greater if it existed in reality. But we wouldn't think that just imagining that something is greater than everything else makes that thing exist. This argument is intended to be analogous to Anselm's ontological argument. This argument does contain persuasive force for many who read it, but it does have some flaws, though not necessarily fatal ones. The maximal greatness of God is a concept arrived at in different ways, including reason. Unlike arguments involving islands, unicorns, and flying spaghetti monsters, which are admittedly fabricated. A further difficulty for Gaunilo's critique is that it is disanalogous in some important ways. One way that it is disanalogous is that islands are contingent things. That is to say, it wouldn't be contradictory to imagine a possible world in which that island did not exist. If it is possible for something to not exist, which it is for all contingent objects or beings, then it can only have relative greatness. That is, it could be great when compared to something else of a similar kind. A necessary existence is greater than a contingent existence. Since all contingent existence is claimed to depend on God's necessary existence, these two arguments are disanalogous. For, since God is conceived of as the greatest being or thing, full stop, not just relative to anything else, necessary existence must also be included. Some of the ways that God's necessary existence is arrived at as a conclusion are examined later in our text. Though these arguments often end in a battle of intuitions, the more recent articulations, including those of Plantinga discussed earlier, are very interesting and sophisticated.